Okay, we're back, we're live, we're here with Think Tech doing the State of Energy, Hawaii, the State of Energy, even if it is a Monday, with Marco Mangelsdorf, Provision Solar from Hilo. He flew in for the program. Thank you, Marco.
My pleasure.
Thanks for being here. You are a veritable cornucopia of information about energy. Marco teaches a course at Hilo called what? Politics and Energy?
Politics of Energy, yes.
Yeah, this is a fabulous discussion. They ought to have that at Manoa, really. They should feed it in, you know, by some kind of hookup, you know what I mean? They're losing the benefit in that part of the state where the legislature lives, or at least works. Anyway, there's so many issues, we'll never have time for all of them, but there was one piece in the paper regarding the possibility of the solar tax credit bill, a bill to terminate it, sunset it, passing, and the article said it wasn't going to pass. Therefore, there would be no termination. What does this mean?
The tax credit, of course, the state tax credit is very important for PV system adoption and is a huge, substantial financial incentive for Hawaii residents to go PV along with the federal tax credit. And there has been concern among some parties that there was a substantial amount of money essentially leaving the state coffers and going to too many places, too much money essentially, including money going out of state. And the Department of Taxation just in the past week or so released some figures for the most recent time period they had data on. That was 2012. And that figure, as came out in the press today with Alan Yonen's piece in the Star Advertiser, came out to $164 million and counting, because that only represents the total sum as of December 31st, 2013. So there has been discussion over the years of modifying the current statutes to put a sunset date on the current state tax credit, which, by the way, there's been a tax credit for solar in existence for 38 years, since 1976. So
then it was just water.
That's correct.
But it wrapped around PV when PV came to town.
Exactly. So last year, there was a big push in the legislature to pass a new tax credit bill, and this was in response to changes that the Department of Taxation made in November of 2012, essentially tightening up some of the requirements so that it was more difficult for a typical homeowner to put in 2, 3, or 4 PV systems and get 2, 3, or 4 credits.
That's fair, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
So there was a big hue and cry in the PV industry after these rule changes, and this led to the efforts last session, 2013, to try to pass a bill that was going to correct the mistakes or the decision that DOTAX had taken in the previous November. So there was a lot of momentum, a lot of support on the part of legislators as well as people in the industry. And the bill made it to a conference committee in May of last year, and it died there. It did not make it out of conference.
Do we know why?
I haven't been able to determine based on anybody being quoted on the record, but from what I understand, there was a concern amongst one or more of the conference committee members that if they were to pass that particular bill out of conference to get it to the governor's desk, that there was an unknown liability that the state was going to be taking on in the years to come without having a clear enough idea of the possible figures involved. Therefore, no action was taken on that particular bill, and we were left then, as we're left now, with the status quo.
There's an irony, isn't it? I mean, last year when this bill was negotiated last year essentially by the solar energy people, the installers, and they wanted to reduce it over time. They said, we don't want it to drop off the world. We want it to, slowly reduce, so that there would be no shock to the industry. That had been going on for a couple of years, that talk. And then it just got stuck and held up, and there was really no public statement about why the bill failed. And now, it's so interesting, and now there is no bill this year, according to Alan Yonen's article. It never happened. So, and the solar guys were unhappy about the tax office changes, which probably motivated them to put that bill in order to correct the tax, change the tax office changes. But now got the tax office changes affirmative, they're confirmed, they're happening. Nobody's, taking them upstairs or anything, and the credit remains with those changes ad infinitum. Yeah, it's permanent.
Right. Well, as permanent as anything can be in politics, right?
Of course.
What I was surprised as well that there wasn't an effort this session to revivify what they tried to do the previous session. I was surprised by that.
Why? I mean, why do you think? Why do you think nothing happened on last session's bill?
The industry, the PV industry, essentially became satisfied enough with the status quo. You may remember that when this announcement was made by DOTAX in November of 2012, that the Sierra Club and Earth Justice, if memory serves correctly, they filed suit against the governor in state court, trying to stop those changes.
On a procedural basis that he hadn't given fair notice under the Administrative Procedures Act.
And that DOTAX simply couldn't do that, essentially, without a legislative fiat behind it.
Yeah.
And that court case was thrown out by the judge. And I have to believe that after the industry got used to these changes and adapted to them, that after all, we have a tax credit, which is one of the more lucrative in the nation. And as you mentioned, the tax credit has no sunset date. So what happens with the new tax credit bill that likely, or if it gets to the governor's desk, what are the components likely to be? I think it's fairly certain that there would be a sunset date. I think it's fairly certain that the tax credit percentage would be ramped down over time. So the better alternative was to leave well enough alone.
For them, for the installer industry, it was a good choice.
Yeah.
Because this way, on and on. And you know what else? The federal tax credit goes hand in glove, is expiring, what, in a year or two?
It ends January 1st, 2017. Make a small correction. It doesn't end completely. It goes down from 30% to 10%. 10% is what it was before it was increased to 30% back in 2005.
So query, is that going to have any effect on this? It seems to me that that's part of the formula somehow, because if I was an installer, I'd say, don't hurt my state credit because I'm going to lose 2/3 of my federal credit, and I need this, and homeowners need this to incentivize them, so don't touch the state credit. And maybe that was part of the discussion about not putting that bill in this year.
Well, that was pretty much the quote from Chris Lee, who's chairman of the House Energy and Environment Committee. He essentially used those exact words in that piece today by Alan Yonan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it looks like for the foreseeable future, we're going to have our existing tax credit, at least for a while, subject to the existing Department of Taxation rules.
Exactly. Now, I think it's striking, and I wanted to point this out, that if you add the 3 full years prior to 2013, as the DOTAX has the data on in terms of the state solar tax credit, 32 million in 2010, 78 million in 2011, and 164 million in 2012.
And climbing.
And increasing as more returns come in.
The expectation was 174 million by the time they pick up all the loose ends.
Right, which is an estimate that DBED made back around September of 2012, for which they were roundly clobbered by many people in the PV industry for being wildly high, and it turns out the DBED turned to be pretty darn close, almost right on the mark. Another thing I was struck by looking at the data regarding the tax credit was that out of the 164 million, 82 million went for the refundable portion of the tax credit.
About half of it.
About half of it, and I'd be willing to wager that of that 82 million, a very, very large percentage of it went out of state to mainland financiers, mainland companies who have been doing very well here in our state over the past several years. which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's interesting to note that this particular feature of the tax credit has allowed for non-Hawaii companies to be able to do quite well.
Yeah, and the interesting comparison that is irresistible is that this is more than Act 221 ever cost in a given year. And people, shouted down Act 221 year after year, even with much smaller cost of tax credit. But now, 164 million, and I didn't hear a peep, did you?
No.
Nobody is complaining about that. It's so interesting. We live in different times. And the need to incentivize the development of a tech industry, which could really take us over the top and make our mono economy into a real one. Nobody wants to spend any money for that. We just want to spend money incentivizing an industry, that may or may not need incentivization at this point.
Well, it brings up a really fundamental question, which is to what degree are tax credits supposed to be in perpetuity? And I don't know of too many tax credits that have been around for as long as this one has. And I think it's worth a discussion, certainly. And what I'm saying is practical heresy in my industry, because I'm in the solar business. I've been in the solar business for a very long time. And tax credits are a huge part of the financial equation for people to buy my product. So why is it that I'm out there suggesting that we have a discussion on it? It's because I'm not trying to commit collective suicide for my business or the industry, as much as that I'm trying to look at the macro level and pose, I think, important questions as to what is the best use of the public's money, and if in fact it's true that a tax credit should be around, at least for this type of industry, until an industry gets on its feet and achieves an economy of scale and price reductions to make it widespread. Then I think you can certainly make the argument that we have achieved that. So
if you were king, what would you do?
I think it's time to ramp it down, to have a schedule of it going down, and allow the industry to stand on its own 2 feet.
How do you reconcile all of that with the numbers you've been collecting, which you're a total authority about this, Marco. You've been collecting these numbers, I guess primarily from the city and county of Honolulu, the city building permit numbers, to say how many installations are going on, what's the building permits involved, and you found a remarkable reduction in the number of permits for PV installations in the past, couple of years, and it's getting worse, no?
The PV permit numbers have been on a steady decline. This past month in February was the 10th straight month of month-over-month decline compared to the same month the previous year, and it indicates certainly a slowing of the industry. I was just having lunch with a good friend of mine this afternoon who's been in the industry pretty much as long as I have, and he went so far as to say that solar is dead. And he wasn't saying it with any sense of glee by any means, because he's to some degree out of the industry right now.
Will you hold for a moment?
Sure.
Because I'd like to let that question hang while we take a short break, and then we come back from the break, you'll explain what he meant. That's Marco Mangelsdorf, Provision Solar in Hilo. We're here talking about Hawaii, the state of clean energy. And we're taking a little look about what the issues are these days. We call it Interconnection Intersection. That's the name of our show. I'm Jay Fidel. We'll be right back after this break. I'm Jay Fidel. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the state of clean energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think that's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us.
Okay, it's every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the state of clean energy, here on Think Tech Hawaii.
Energy
See you. We're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidel here at Think Tech. Today we're talking about the state of clean energy in Hawaii. We call it Interconnection Intersection with Marco Mangelsdorf of Provision and Solar in Hilo. So the question hanging before we left for the break was, according to this fellow you had lunch with, maybe solar is dead, PV is dead. What's the parameters of that discussion?
I think it's an exaggeration to say solar is dead. So I don't think he meant it so much in a literal, it died yesterday or will die today or die tomorrow. But I pressed him a little bit on this, and I asked him, do you think it's going to be this precipitous off the cliff, or was it be more kind of bell curve shape? And he said the latter. And I would concur with that. I think it's clear that there are a number of limitations, and we went through boom years over the past couple of years, which rocketed Hawaii to #1 position in terms of per capita PV in the whole country, with California being a distant second. So any notion, in my opinion, that the state's utility companies have been obstructionist or vehemently anti-solar, have this rickety old grid that they refuse to modernize, and are trying their best to maintain this antiquated business model. I find that to be rather curious, given the data of Hawaii having come so far with PV in the state. So in terms of solar being dead, no, that's not the case, but unless there's some type of dramatic near-term practical, cost-effective, in the previous interviews we've done, I keep on falling back on the same words, same descriptions. There are no immediate, large-scale, ready-to-go, generally accepted fixes that are going to dramatically change the landscape in the near term.
So we've got various factors working here, some pushing and some pulling. So what's pushing is the continuation of the solar tax credit. I mean, that would push the curve up, and it would suggest, that that's a force to increase the amount of installation, or at least to hold it steady. And then you get people who are maybe concerned with exactly what's happening about the tax credit. Maybe they're concerned about the federal tax credit going lower. Maybe they don't like this interconnect thing they read about in the newspaper and hear from their neighbors, so they feel like this is not as stable, not as predictable as it used to be. Mm-hmm. And if they're going to put out, tens of thousands or 20s of thousands of dollars, they want to have more predictability, and so they back off, and that's maybe why the numbers are going down. And then you get a question of, storage. Aside from all the noise about interconnect, the fact is that we don't have storage. We don't have the fix. We don't have a way to take. And, people will have to admit that. Everyone will have to admit that we don't have a way to take everything that people could give. And so that may be a factor sort of driving installations down. But where's it going to go? Is it going to hit a kind of stasis at some place? I mean, what is the ultimate effect of all of this going forward?
I feel, and I think I have a lot of company to observe, that we are in a brave new world out here in Hawaii. Of course, we're very different from the mainland in that we have these independent, non-integrated grids, and there is a lot of attention that the state is getting, the utilities are getting from far and wide, including the U.S. Department of Energy, and think groups and tech groups and industry groups on the mainland, who are looking at our state as this test laboratory, essentially, to see, gee, how far can a utility go in integrating a distributed generation, non-firm power into a grid. And I keep on going back to the simplistic observation that The grid is finite, that's not disputable. Therefore, the amount of power feeding into a grid has to be finite. So the question then becomes, well, what's the best optimal mix between firm power, which up until this day and age, a certain amount of firm power is needed, versus non-firm power, which can be from wind, can be from solar, from other sources from nature that can bedevil and challenge utility operators to see how it can all mix in, and for them to serve their fiduciary responsibility to their investors, which is, of course, is important, but also just as important, keeping the lights on, keeping their ratepayers supplied with reliable power. So another factor, as you mentioned, tax credits is a push. It's also the high cost of electricity, of course, here in the state. So one of the mitigating means in the short term that has caused a fair amount of debate and will continue is LNG, liquefied natural gas, coming into the state, right? And it appears the Abercrombie administration is supporting that. The gas company, of course, is supporting that. And but other groups like the, as far as I know, the Sierra Club and
they opposed it. Yeah, Sierra Club and
Blue Planet. Yeah.
But it's interesting if one day we wake up and the newspaper has a headline about how LNG is going forward, and in X years of time we'll all have cheap LNG at half the rate we pay, even half the rate we pay for PV, a really low rate in the teens somewhere, then people aren't necessarily going to be so motivated to buy PV, are they? They're going to wait around for the cheap rate in LNG.
Well, by then the cost of PV is likely to be cheaper than it is now. So I think PV will continue to be price competitive pretty much no matter how low, within practicality, how low electrical costs will go out here. I think we'll always be at somewhat of a disadvantage because of the distance that it takes to bring fossil fuels across the ocean. And I don't know, I probably shared this with you once or twice, but I went to my first renewable energy solar conference here in Hawaii in 1979 or 1980 at the Sheraton, and we're talking 34 years ago. And there was speaker after speaker, from Mayor Frank Fozzi to Spark Matsunaga to all sorts of other political heavyweights at the time, who talked about how Hawaii could be this incredible example of self-sufficiency when it comes to energy. So 30 plus years, where are we? Well, we've certainly made progress on the electrical front, especially on the Big Island. Big Island, I got to give full credit to my Helco friends for being now more than 40% renewable, and that's going up year by year by year. And of course, a big chunk of that is geothermal, another big chunk is wind. But so much of the rhetoric is the same as it was 30 plus years ago, and we still are dependent to the tune of 85-ish% for all our energy needs for imported petroleum. And real tough nut to crack. Electricity is one thing, but liquid fuels for transportation, that, as I've spoken to my students on a number of occasions, that's a really tough,
including especially
really tough one.
Airplane fuel.
Absolutely.
Which would be a real problem if it goes short worldwide. We'll suffer in our tourism, for sure. Okay, so other things that are happening. Let's see. Just you alluded to the feed-in, well, before we started, the feed-in tariff. The feed-in tariff is related to all this interconnect issue. Whatever happened to it? We know about net metering, and that's the part that I think people get excited about these days, because that helps them balance their PV with whatever the utility is charging them for. Mm-hmm. But what about net metering? That seems to have been
feed-in tariff, or no?
I'm sorry, the feed-in tariff. Right. What about the feed-in tariff?
The feed-in tariff was rolled out in the end of 2011. It's something that the utilities and the PUC and a number of interested stakeholders put a lot of time and effort into as a way of incentivizing mid to large scale renewable energy projects being constructed and feeding into the grid, where the system or project owner or owners would be essentially assured of a fairly predictable rate of return based on a solar kilowatt hour fetching X cents per kilowatt hour, depending on the size of the system and depending on the island. And when it rolled out to a lot of fanfare, the way project developers were able to move forward is that they were able to propose systems and get them in the queue, so to speak, which was all done essentially on a website. And the reality after more than 2 years now, 2012 and 2013, is that yes, there have been, I don't have the exact number, but several dozen FIT systems that have been installed across HECO, HELCO, and MECO territories. But I think if you talk to anyone who has been observing this or participating in the feed-in tariff debate over the past years, is that there's been quite a bit of disappointment that now 2+ years into it, there aren't more FIT systems that are actually producing power. And there were concerns enough on the part of the Public Utilities Commission, the PUC, that they, in essence, froze the program last October. So it's been in a state of suspended animation since then, as the PUC and the independent observer, who has been contracted by the PUC to kind of maintain, organize,
Carl
manage.
Friedman, is it?
No, that's Harry Judd.
Okay.
Yeah. To work out the bugs and to make changes that would make for a new and improved FIT program that would be rolled out at some point in the future. But as far as I know, there's no definitive date as to when that's going to be the case.
I get so concerned about this. See all these hullabaloo, you know, about new programs, and lots of stuff in the paper about everybody talking about it. Lots of talk, and then nothing happens for years and years. I'm still waiting, and you can comment on this, on the on-bill financing arrangement. You know, I get the sense of something happening under the covers, but I haven't seen anything actually over the covers. What's happening? Do you know?
I don't.
I don't know if anybody really knows.
I know that, I mean, it was passed last year and signed by the governor. But what the current status is in terms of a rollout, I'm not privy to that information. And it probably would be my assertion that the reality is that over the past several years, there have been enough companies that have been established in the state that allow for a typical homeowner, most typical homeowners, to go PV with no money out of pocket. So what is going to be the tangible difference or improvement from on-bill financing compared to what's available in the marketplace right now? And I don't know, that there's much.
Let me offer this thought, that even if the terms, the economics of on-bill financing were somehow better than what these mainland companies are bringing into the marketplace here, even if that was so, the ability of the state structures to actually implement this, the ability, to get it on down the road, actually do it, that's not going to be as good as some of these mainland companies that they know how to do it. They won't hesitate. It is happening.
Right.
It's available in the marketplace. You just sign the dotted line and off you go. It's hard to compete with that. It's another, it may not be the actual dollars, it's the way it's handled.
Mm-hmm.
You have to wait, how many years to have it in place already. And if they have to change it, how many years will we wait for that? Okay, well, anyway, what about the interconnect issues themselves? We named this the interconnect intersection. And the utility is trying to do stuff. It's making transition a little easier. It's doing a little backup on some of the hard rulings that it was making. Where are we in that? I mean, are people happier, notably happier, or is everybody still mad?
More the latter. Let me answer that this way. I've been doing PV here in the state of Hawaii now for about 14 years. And I was hired back in 2000 to be one of the founding members of, back then it was Provision Technologies. And Provision Technologies was a wholly owned subsidiary of Hawaiian Electric Industries, the parent company of HECO, HELCO, MECO, American Savings Bank. So I got a chance to work within that organization and to meet some of the principals and top management over the years And in 2003, the HEI board decided to close Provision down. They wanted to go in a different direction. So rather than accept their job offer to work at HECO, since I was living on the Big Island, I thought about that briefly, and I thought, how about you sell me the company instead? So I got together with a longtime friend of mine, Douglas Bath, who I'd known since junior high school in California. We ended up buying Provision, and several years ago changed it to Provision Solar just to make it more clear and specific what we do. So the reason I bring this up is because I got a chance to know HECO 14 years ago with people like Bob Clark as HEI chairman, Mike May as president, Warren Lee as the president of HELCO, all good folks. And I got a chance to see inside the structure and get a sense of what the mindset was. And I don't believe that back then, or even 5-10 years ago, that there was any idea, any anticipation of just how much the utilities were going to be accommodating and accepting in terms of solar PV. I think if you had told their engineers 5 or 6, 7 years ago, believe it or not, this is where you're going to be in 2014, I think they would have laughed. They would have shaken their head and said, no way, can't do it. Can't do it. I mean, part of that is institutional. Utilities by nature are not known to be dynamic risk takers, right? That's nothing negative about them. It's kind of the nature of the structure.
You want the lights on.
We
don't take any chances.
We do want the lights on. And engineers especially. So I think it's rather phenomenal how far they've been able to come. Now, does that mean that they should stop? No. Does that mean that they're stopping? No. Just a couple weeks ago, they announced that instead of the 100% of gross daytime minimum load, without getting to too much technobabble, they are going from 100% to 120%. So that the takeaway from that is that they are moving in the direction of, yet again, going to take more PV into the grid. First, they were a number of years ago at 50, then they raised it to 75, then they were at 100, now it's 120%. So,
is that because they have more technology to handle it, or is it because they have found that they can take more on what is essentially existing technology?
I can't give you a definitive answer to that. It's probably more the former. Former or the latter. The latter being that they have learned over time that if they go to X percentage, that there's not system-wide failure and collapse. It'll still work. So it's been an incremental increase, I think, that they've
Well, that sounds reasonable to me.
Well, it sounds reasonable to me as well. But, at the same time, when you do have contractors, especially here on this island, who have told me that they have not 5, not 10, not 50, but hundreds of sales that they've consummated that are being held up because of saturation issues, I mean, that's non-trivial, right? So I'm not disputing that at all. I mean, there is serious pain going on in the industry right now. And the utility companies, I think, are always going to be subject to some criticism unless and until, at least the ones here, unless and until they were to essentially adopt we open the doors fully, anybody who wants to come on and connect can do so, and come on at us.
Talking about risk.
And that's not going to happen, right? And I use kind of the analogy of if you have a freeway, I mean, there are rules in the freeway, right? I'm a native Californian, and you run into metering to get on the freeway during rush hour, right? If you were to just say, okay, the freeway, we're going to just do a free-for-all. You can have pedestrians, you can have people with go-karts, you can have people with mopeds, you can have people coming on with whatever kind of vehicles they want, drive however they want, however slow, however fast. I mean, it would be anarchy, right? It's just kind of a simplistic analogy, but there are restrictions that necessarily must be there when you have, for lack of a better phrase, public commons that have to be maintained, have to be regulated. So in that sense, the grid, even though the grid is essentially owned and maintained by private companies, well, private, I mean public in this sense because they're publicly traded, but they have a responsibility for the public good of the public commons. So they've got the competing priority of maintaining reliability, maintaining reasonable pricing, and also allow people who want to go with an independent or a system that will allow them to feel more independent to put a PV system on their home.
It sounds like there's a certain amount of communications failure in the sense that the installers and the guys who signed those contracts without having any assurance they'd be able to connect. On the one hand, they say, well, the utility's at fault. They should have told us this is going to happen. And, you know, on the other hand, you can make a pretty good argument on the behalf of the utility is that you guys can't come at us with all of this stuff. You know, you have to realize that we can't take it all. So each side, you know, says that the other side should have done better communication, warnings, what have you, about the problems ahead. And then you get into the whole question about policing and the idea that a lot of installers are installing and connecting even when they have no agreement with no permission to connect to the grid under the current rules. So I want to take another break so we can leave that question hanging. When we come back, we'll talk about who's policing or not and who should be policing or not. Okay, that's Marco Mangelsdorf, Provision Solar, not technologies, but solar, Provision Solar in Hilo. This is Hawaii, the state of clean energy. We're talking about interconnection, intersection. We'll be right back after this break. Castle and Cook, Hawaii. Investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state. Collateral Analytics, empowering the real estate industry to make better informed property investment decisions. The Foreign Trade Zone, bringing the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone programs to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. Galen Ho, a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company. Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island. The Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, incorporating diverse perspectives to design a flexible and forward-looking energy strategy. Hawaii Energy, the state's energy and efficiency program created to help Hawaii's residents and businesses adopt a clean energy lifestyle. Hawaii Gas, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future. Hawaii Pacific Health, bringing technology and teamwork together to transform healthcare in Hawaii. The High Tech Development Corporation, attached to DBED, is the state's leading technology agency. The Scheidler Family Foundation, supporting educational, cultural, and charitable organizations, including think tank. Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Marco Mangelsdorf, who flew in for the show from Hilo. He's with Provision Solar, a founder of that company. I should say a buyer of that company, as you discussed. Here we are in Hawaii, the state of clean energy, with, what do you call it? Interconnection, intersection, which is really the words of the day somehow. So Marco, the question we left hanging at the end was, you know, this thing about lawlessly, may I say, connecting a given PV installation with the utility. A, how damaging is that to the utility, to the grid in general? And B, who's supposed to be policing it? Who is policing it?
Well, connecting any type of independent distributed generation electrical system and producing power, sending power into the grid without the utility being involved is known as guerrilla solar. That phrase has been around for a very long time. And it's something that we in the industry should not abide by, we should not support, and we should condemn when we hear instances of it, because it's really a lose-lose-lose proposition. It's a lose proposition for the customer, because there could be sanctions against the customer.
Like cut them off.
Cut them off. It's a lose for the utility, because they are the first one blamed, essentially, for being so slow or so reluctant to connect systems, and also it's a lose for the contractor because it reflects badly on us. Unfortunately, that hasn't stopped this kind of behavior from taking place. The two principal industry trade organizations here in the state, which is the Hawaii Solar Energy Association, HSEA, and the Hawaii PV Coalition, have both been working with HECO to advise against this kind of behavior, and that's certainly laudable. Another concern that I've had is, at least since September of last year, when HECO announced or essentially said, look, there are enough saturated circuits that are on the island that we are requiring that new systems that go in, that before you install, let alone interconnect, you need to submit the NEM, the net energy metering paperwork, so that we can review the circuit and so we can approve it, approve your system going in. And that particular action by HECO was roundly criticized as being really bad timing. Oh, we're coming to the busiest time of the year. How can you do this to us now?
Only because of the tax credits. That's why it was the busiest time of the year.
Q3 and especially Q4 are typically the busiest because people can realize the value of the tax credits sooner rather than later, right? So that caused this almost quasi-panic within the industry that this was going to have the drawbridge go up at the worst time of the year. And a number of companies, including some of the major players here on the island, made the decision that they were going to go ahead and install systems before getting HECO approval. And
you mean intentionally?
Yes. Yes, it was a way of getting work done. It was a way of keeping up cash flow, and it was also unacceptable behavior, in my opinion, because it's essentially a gambling that...
Catch me if you can.
Gambling that sooner or later, one way or the other, the utility company, in this case HECO, was going to have to interconnect. So I was rather...
Can't the utility company tell when somebody is, you know, connecting without permission? Can't they tell?
Well, depending on where the solar modules are installed, they may or may not be visible to the typical meter reader. So that's one point, and if they're not visible, then it's less difficult, it's less easy to see. Second, if the system is sized to not create a surplus amount of power at the end of the billing period, which is typically 30 days, then it may be less obvious to the accountants and bookkeeping people at HECO who are going through, obviously, you know, hundreds of thousands of accounts. So unless they're really going to develop, put manpower, people power into this, it's difficult to tell. So yes, they can tell, but they haven't had, from what I can tell, probably the resources to really. And then look, the utility doesn't want to become the solar police, in my opinion.
Who should be the solar police?
Ourselves, the industry. In terms of not just thinking, gee, I have to make payroll, I have to keep revenue in order to pay overhead, but how to treat our customers, which by and large, most PV companies, the bread and butter are homeowners, and not these mondo commercial projects, is folks down the street, right? What's the best way to treat these people from an ethical standpoint? And
but these installers have the right or the power, no pun, of actually connecting the wires, you know, to connect the PV to the wires that go through the net energy metering system. And it seems to me that if they're licensed, and they are, assuming all of them are licensed, then they're breaking the rules by doing that. And their license should be in jeopardy, shouldn't it?
From what I understand, there are current efforts underway amongst some of the stakeholders to take this up with the DCCA and the RICO people who deal with the enforcement of proper behavior following rules amongst licensed contractors. But to what extent and how soon there's going to be some type of sanction, I don't know. I mean, my impression is that utility companies, again, really don't want to go down the path of being seen as the solar police, where they're sending people in trucks and locking out people's PV systems.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just atrocious PR, right? And
Atrocious
they're
PR,
smart enough that they don't want to
easy
go
to
down
let it
that
happen.
road.
But by letting it happen, they're putting everyone else at risk, because then it's that highway with the chaos.
Right.
Moving on to the last point I would like to talk with you about, and that is these bills, at least two of them that I know, that are pending in the legislature about the utility. One is a bill to require HECO to upgrade its grid. I'm not sure what the detail is. And the other is a bill to re-examine or cause the PUC to re-examine the whole business model around the utility. What are these, punishment bills? Where do they come from?
I think the background, Jay, is that there's no shortage of populist sentiment amongst the buying public, amongst PV contractors, amongst many legislators.
Media, too.
The media as well, that somehow the utility companies just aren't doing it. And when you look at it from the perspective of a homeowner who lives on a block, who has seen his or her neighbors, most of them on the block, go PV, who are raving about how much they've seen their HECO bill drop, and who've been thinking about it for a year, 2 years or longer, and think, by golly, I'm ready to go now. And they find a contractor, everybody's enthusiastic to move forward, and it happens to be in 100+% saturated circuit, and HECO's response has been, just like Helco and NECO's, for these highly saturated circuits, essentially, we're working on it. We'll get back to you. I wouldn't feel good about that. I mean, nobody is, okay, I believe them, I'll be patient.
It's Kafka-esque. How's my case doing? It's fine, just be patient. But so now this leads to this animosity, and the animosity focuses in the legislature with that hearing in October, where it was it was sort of an attack on the utility there by the PV installers. But now these two bills, I mean, I don't know exactly what the status of them are. Neither of them seems to be appropriate, but I'm interested in your thoughts.
The one that to me seems the more kind of draconian, if I understand it, and I haven't recently read the language of the current version, which is, there was the crossover, I think, just last week, essentially re-examine the franchise given by the state to these companies, HECO, Helco, MECO, as to whether they are truly serving in the best interests of the citizens of the state. What the possible end game would be, or end result, I don't know. But I mean, there has been, you've been around long enough to know as well that not too long ago there was talk of essentially a hooey of people taking HEI private.
Kuakoa.
Right. Right, and they got some
Ted Peck and Bridget Ha.
And James Woolsey, of all people.
Yes.
Woolsey, who was former CIA chief under Bill Clinton. Interesting. Where'd he come from? But anyway, this company, this hooey of people, was going to take HEI private, and then, of course, it was going to be much different and much better than it was under HEI guidance. And that didn't go anywhere.
It fell apart.
Fell apart. So the notion that you can take the biggest corporation in the state, which HEI is by market cap, and reformulate it and change it dramatically so it'll better serve the interests of the citizens of Hawaii. I mean, I can kind of understand from a more idealistic utopian perspective that sounds, who wouldn't be against that? Do a better job, right? Give the power of generating power to the people, right? But
it's not so simple.
It's not so simple, and it's really, in my years of political science and looking at legislature, which is either on the state level or the national level, you really don't know what the end game is until the end game, and that is conference committee. So that would, if it were to make it to the governor's desk in any way, shape, or form of what it is now, it would be big news, possibly.
And usually disruptive. Sorry.
Yeah.
Now, what about the other bill requiring HECO to upgrade the grid? And it would seem to me that they would do that anyway, but having a statute for that purpose, it's you wonder about.
Well, according to HECO, the utility companies have spent substantial amounts of money over the past years to do just that. Now, whether they've spent as much as they should have, whether they've accomplished as much as they should have, those are all rather subjective questions and determinations that I don't have an answer to. But I believe that that particular bill that we're talking about now is also a result of the populist sentiment about, I can't go PV, that's not fair, I'm going to complain to my elected representative, whether it's the county council, city county council, whether it's my House rep, whether it's my senator, and bring this to their attention. And I have no doubt that many of the members of the legislature have had this brought to their attention by very upset people. So they craft these bills, they pass them along, and again, to what extent, what the likelihood of success of this bill getting to the very end of the session, I'm not that much of a gambling man to put a wager on. But I mean, the sentiment is the same for a lot of these bills. It's an unhappiness, it's a frustration with the status quo. I get that. We all get that. The question is, how do we get beyond the frustration and work in a collaborative, cooperative way where there is not, my goodness, some of the nastiness that I've seen, militant, vehement
And yet,
rhetoric.
some of the people who are angry and nasty would say to you, this is what we need to do in order to create a collaborative environment. I actually do not accept that, because I think if you do that, you're not creating a collaborative environment at all.
Right.
You're polarizing the environment. It's just the opposite.
And is it possible to beat a company like HEI, HECO, HELCO, and MECO into submission?
Doubt it. Yeah, well, let's leave it there, and then we'll have another discussion in a few weeks and see how these things go. And who knows, Marco, but maybe in the middle of it, you know, we will find that, for one thing, somebody has invented a new battery. Mm-hmm. There was a couple of articles in the MIT Tech Review in the past few days to that very effect, that a new battery, cheaper than, what's the good kind now?
Well, standard lead acid has been around for more than 100 years, but just to briefly follow up on that, Elon Musk, who's a very wealthy individual and behind Tesla mm-hmm. Motors, and a lot of other interesting things, he is spending quite a bit of money, from what I understand, developing and producing, or soon to be producing on a mass scale, lithium-ion batteries that he's going to be working with Solar City. Solar City is run by Lyndon Rive, and he's a cousin of Elon's, if I'm not mistaken, so there's been some cross-fertilization there. So Solar City may be the first large-scale solar integrator to have access to more cutting-edge battery technology, and they're, gosh, last I saw, after they went public, they're around $7 billion of market cap right now. I mean, there's a hunger out there, that's a different subject, hunger out there amongst investors for this kind of business and this kind of technology that a lot of people feel not just the technology of the future, but is of today.
Yeah. Well, and that brings me to the last thought I just want to articulate, and that is we have to move as fast as we can possibly move without taking unreasonable risks. But this whole thing is moving worldwide. And Hawaii should be right up at the front.
We are.
Yeah.
Number one.
Okay, well, in some ways.
Yeah.
In some ways it takes too long to do even small things.
Well, again, number one in per capita PV in the entire country, just like we've been number one in per capita solar water heating for decades. So it's something to be proud of, but not rest on our laurels, because there's clearly a lot more work to be done.
Marco, thank you so much for coming down. Great to have you on the show. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you.
Marco Mangelsdorf from Provision Solar in Hilo flew in for the show. I really appreciate that. Here, Hawaii, the state of clean energy, interconnection, intersection, More to come next time with Marco. Thank you so much. Aloha.